The door was the only thing holding the world at bay, and Finn held the door. His knuckles were white where he gripped the cold iron of the latch. His rifle canted easy but ready across his other arm. Outside, the snow wasn't falling. It was attacking, a horizontal blizzard that scoured the landscape and erased the horizon. It hissed against the rough-hewn logs of his cabin, a sound like 1,000 angry snakes. Then he saw them, 2 figures materializing from the white chaos like ghosts. They stumbled into the small clearing he'd carved from the pines, one small and stooped, the other taller, a slash of impossible color in the monochrome fury. She wore a light orange prairie dress, a thing of summer and sunshine, now dark with melting snow and utterly pathetic against the storm's teeth. Her face was a pale oval, her dark eyes wide with a desperation that was almost an accusation. She half dragged the older woman with her, supporting her weight as they fought their way to his threshold. When she looked up at him, her lips blue with cold. He felt a jolt, a memory like a phantom limb that he'd learned to ignore. "Please," she said, her voice thin against the wind's roar. "Shelter, just until it passes." He didn't move. His face was a mask of granite, carved by solitude and a winter that lived inside him. "I got no room for strangers. Go back the way you came." The younger woman shook her head, a frantic motion. Tears froze on her lashes. "We can't. We will die out there. You know me." The words hung in the air, a hook snagging on something deep inside him. He hardened his jaw, forcing the lock on a door in his mind. He looked straight through her, at the screaming white void behind her. "I never had a wife." The lie was as cold and hard as a river stone. As he began to push the heavy plank door shut, the older woman crumpled, a silent, boneless collapse into the snow. The girl in orange cried out, a raw sound of grief and fear. Finn's gaze dropped to the fallen figure, then back to the younger one's pleading, terrified face. The storm shrieked, a promise of a clean, white death. With a curse that was swallowed by the gale, he wrenched the door open again. "Get in, both of you." Once inside, the world shrank to the dimensions of the single room, the storm's howl muted to a low moan at the chinks in the walls. The air was thick with the scent of pine smoke, stale bacon, and the damp wool of their clothes. Finn slammed the bar across the door, the heavy thud echoing with finality. He didn't look at them. He moved to the stone hearth, prodding the embers into a reluctant dance of flame. The cabin was a testament to a life stripped to its essentials. A cot, a table, 2 chairs, and shelves holding tins and sacks of flour. No comfort, only function. "Stay by the fire," he ordered, his voice flat. "Don't touch anything." He watched them from the corner of his eye as he checked the action on his rifle. The younger woman, May, had managed to drag her companion onto the bearskin rug near the warmth. The older one, Auntie Wynne, was breathing in shallow, rattling gasps. May worked with a quiet, desperate efficiency, chafing the old woman's hands, loosening the frozen shawl from around her neck. Her movements were graceful, even in her exhaustion. He remembered those hands. He remembered the way they moved when she'd shown him the intricate knotwork of a silk tassel. He shoved the memory down, burying it under the weight of the last 2 years. He took a tin cup, filled it with water from a bucket, and set it near the flames to warm. When steam began to rise, he nudged it toward them with the toe of his boot, a gesture that was half provision, half dismissal. May looked up, her expression a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why did you say that?" Finn turned his back on her, busying himself with reloading the cartridges he'd spent on a deer the day before. The metallic click of brass sliding into the chamber was the only answer he would give. The lie he had told was not for her. It was for him. It was the foundation of this life, the first stone laid in the wall he'd built around himself. If he acknowledged her, if he let one sliver of the past into this frozen present, the entire structure would collapse. So he worked, and he watched, and he said nothing, letting the silence and the storm press in on them all. The storm did not break. For 3 days the world outside remained a churning torrent of white, imprisoning them in the small, tense space of the cabin. Time seemed to congeal, measured only by the logs Finn added to the fire and the meager rations he portioned out. He gave them food without comment, hardtack and salted meat, placing the plates on the floor near the hearth as if feeding stray animals. He slept on his cot, fully dressed, his rifle beside him. They slept on the rug by the fire. He felt May's eyes on him constantly, a silent, persistent questioning he refused to meet. Her initial desperation had hardened into a watchful stillness, a quiet assessment that unnerved him more than tears would have. He saw her studying his hands as he cleaned his pistol, the scar above his left eye, the way his gaze perpetually swept past the single grimy window. She knew he was waiting for something more than the end of the storm. On the third day, the wind abated slightly, and he knew he had to clear the snow from the roof before its weight became a danger. He pulled on his heavy coat and boots, his movements economical and precise. Stay inside. Don't unbar the door for any reason. He didn't wait for a response, stepping out into the blinding, sculpted landscape of the blizzard's aftermath. Inside, the silence he left behind was different. It was an opportunity. May helped Auntie Wynne, now stronger but still weak, sip some warm broth. Then, driven by a need for order in the chaos, she began to gently sweep the hearth with a worn broom. The space was his, but she couldn't stand the idleness. As she swept near the edge of the stone hearth, the broom bristles caught on the corner of a floorboard. It was loose. A flicker of curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, an instinct, made her kneel. Her fingers, still numb with a residual chill, worked at the edge. The board came up with a soft groan of old wood. Beneath it, nestled in the dark, peaty earth, was a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her heart began to beat a frantic, painful rhythm. With trembling hands, she unwrapped it. Inside was a silk pouch, embroidered with a pattern of 2 cranes, their necks intertwined. She had made this. It had taken her a month, each stitch a prayer for their future. Her fingers fumbled with the drawstring. She tipped its contents into her palm. A single, smooth river stone, gray and perfectly ordinary, except that it was the one he had given her on the banks of the Sacramento, a promise of permanence. He hadn't forgotten. He had hidden it. He had lied. Finn returned an hour later, the cold clinging to him like a shroud. He stamped the snow from his boots and shoved his hat and gloves onto a peg by the door. The moment he stepped fully inside, he felt it. The air in the cabin had changed. It was no longer just tense. It was sharp, brittle, ready to shatter. May was standing by the table, her back ramrod straight. The firelight caught the vibrant silk of the small pouch she held clutched in her hand. Her other hand was closed in a tight fist around the river stone. His gaze flickered from the pouch to the disturbed floorboard by the hearth, and he knew. The wall he had so carefully constructed had been breached from the inside. He said nothing, just unslung his rifle and leaned it against the wall, the motion deliberate, slow. He was buying time, but there was no time left. "You are a liar," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room, clear and cold as ice. It wasn't a question. He met her eyes then, for the first time since she'd arrived. He saw the deep well of her hurt, but beneath it, something else was surfacing, a hard, defiant anger. The vulnerable girl in the orange dress was gone. "I did what I had to do," he rasped, his own voice sounding foreign to him. "To survive." "To survive?" She took a step toward him, her knuckles white where she gripped the stone. "You left me there. You sent a message saying you were dead. I waited. For a year I waited. For a ghost. The story began to spill out of him then, not in a flood, but in jagged, painful pieces. He spoke of a man named Reed, a man with money and influence who had financed his passage west, who had arranged their marriage. A man who saw May not as a wife, but as property. He changed the terms, Finn said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the dark knots in the table. He wanted you for himself. He said if I didn't disappear, he would kill us both. He told her he ran, that he came here to this isolated place to hide, to figure a way out. He told her he believed she was safer thinking he was dead. It was a partial truth, a curated version of his own cowardice. As he spoke, a new sound intruded, a sharp crack from the woods outside that wasn't the groan of a snow-laden branch. Finn froze mid-sentence, his head snapping up. His entire body went rigid, his posture shifting from that of a haunted man to a cornered animal. Every line of him screamed danger. He strode to the window, peering through a small, clean patch on the glass. "What is it?" May whispered, her own anger momentarily forgotten in the face of his sudden, absolute tension. He turned from the window, his face grim, all traces of the past gone, replaced by a terrifyingly focused present. They're here. The world outside the window resolved into three distinct shapes against the snow, dark riders moving through the pines with a predatory confidence. At their head was a man whose bulk seemed to strain the leather of his coat, a face Finn knew from sweat-soaked nightmares. Corbett, Mr. Reed's enforcer. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up May's throat, but the sight of Finn's movement smothered it. He moved with a brutal, mesmerizing grace, his previous lethargy burned away by pure adrenaline. He slammed the heavy window shutter into place, plunging the room into dim, fire-lit gloom. "Get down," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "Stay away from the walls." He grabbed his rifle, checking the load with a practiced motion. He tossed a heavy sack of flour to May. "Put that against the door." For a moment she was paralyzed, the reality of the threat crashing down on her. Then, seeing Auntie Wynne pulling herself into the relative safety of the space beneath the table, May's fear transmuted into action. She dragged the heavy sack, its weight grounding her, and wedged it against the barred door. From outside a voice boomed, amplified by the cold, still air. "Finn, we know you're in there. Mr. Reed sends his regards. He's come to collect his property." Finn was already at a small chink in the log wall, a firing hole he'd clearly prepared long ago. He didn't answer. The only reply was the deafening crack of his rifle. A cry of pain from outside followed, then an angry shout. A heartbeat later, the world exploded in a shower of glass and splintered wood as a pistol shot shattered the remaining window pane, the one without a shutter. The bullet thudded into the log wall opposite, inches from where May had been standing. She scrambled back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Finn fired again, a calm, measured shot. "Cartridges," he grunted, not taking his eye from the chink. "On the shelf, in the tin box." May found the box, her hands shaking as she opened it. The brass casings felt heavy, lethal. She crawled across the floor and placed the box beside him. He reloaded without looking, his focus absolute. He was no longer the broken man from her memory, or the cold stranger from the past few days. He was a protector, a warrior, his entire being narrowed to the singular purpose of keeping the violence outside from getting in. In that moment, he was the man she had once believed him to be. The siege settled into a grim, deadly rhythm. Corbett and his two men were professionals, not common bandits. They didn't charge wildly but used the landscape, moving between the thick pines and rocky outcrops that dotted the clearing. They laid down suppressing fire, bullets chewing at the cabin's logs, sending splinters flying through the dim interior. Each shot was an assault, a percussive shock that vibrated through the floorboards. Finn was their equal in patience. He husbanded his ammunition, firing only when he had a clear target, making each shot a deliberate, lethal calculation. The cabin, which had been a prison of tension, was now their only fortress. The air grew thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, which mingled with the wood smoke to create a suffocating perfume of conflict. Time lost its meaning, stretching and compressing with each exchange of fire. During a lull, Corbett's taunting voice echoed again. "You can't have much water in there, Finn, or food. How's the pretty little thing holding up? Reed says to bring her back without a mark on her, but he didn't say nothing about you." Finn's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his eyes scanning the tree line. A ricochet sent a sliver of hot lead skittering across the room. It grazed Finn's forearm, opening a shallow but bloody gash. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but didn't move from his post. May saw the dark stain spreading on his sleeve. Without a thought, she ripped a long strip from the hem of her petticoat. She crawled to him, her movements low and sure. "Let me see," she insisted, her voice quiet but firm. He glanced at her, then back outside before reluctantly extending his arm. She cleaned the wound with a cloth dipped in their precious drinking water and bound it tightly, her fingers surprisingly steady. Her touch was professional, impersonal, yet it was the most intimate contact they'd had. As she tied the knot, Auntie Wynne spoke from her shelter under the table, her voice raspy but clear. "They will try fire next. It is the easiest way." As if summoned by her words, a new smell drifted through the breached window, the scent of pitch and burning oil. A flickering orange light began to dance against the snow outside. They were preparing torches. The walls that protected them were about to become their funeral pyre. The flickering light grew, casting dancing, monstrous shadows into the cabin. Fear, a cold and primal thing, began to seep back into the room. They could fight bullets, but they couldn't fight fire. Corbett's voice came again, closer this time, smug and certain. "Last chance, Finn. It's a shame to burn such good lumber." Then he said the words that shattered everything. "The deal's still good. Give us the girl, and the deed is yours. Reed signed it himself. 160 acres, free and clear." May froze, the cloth in her hands forgotten. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Finn. The noise of the crackling torches, the whistle of the wind, it all faded into a dull roar in her ears. The deed, the land. It wasn't just that he had run to survive. It wasn't just that he had hidden from a threat. He had made a bargain. He had traded her. The memory of the silk pouch, the river stone, it all curdled in her stomach. They weren't keepsakes of a love he was forced to abandon. They were relics of a transaction he had failed to complete. The foundation of fragile, emergent trust that had been built between them during the firefight crumbled into dust. All his actions, letting them in, protecting them, were cast in a new, hideous light. Was he protecting her or his potential property? "Was it worth it?" she asked, her voice a hollow whisper that was somehow louder than the gunfire. "This piece of dirt?" Finn flinched as if she had struck him. He finally tore his gaze from the firing slit to look at her, and in his eyes she saw not denial, but a deep, gut-wrenching shame. The truth was uglier than any lie he could have told. He had come here not just to hide, but to claim his prize. "May I—" he started, but his voice broke. He had no defense. The betrayal was absolute, leaving a wound far deeper than any bullet could. Outside, a torch arched through the air, a fiery comet that landed on the roof with a soft, hungry whoomp. The smell of burning shingles began to fill the air. Their time was running out. The sight of the flames licking at his roof seemed to burn the last of Finn's cowardice away. The fire was not just a threat, it was a crucible. In its light, he saw the man he had become, a craven bargainer trading a human soul for a plot of land. The shame that had silenced him now galvanized him. "It was never worth it," he said, his voice raw with self-loathing. "I was a fool. I thought I could get the land, then use the money to get you back from him. I thought I could buy you back." He looked from May's stricken face to the growing fire. "There's only one way." He kicked aside the bearskin rug, revealing a heavy trap door. "Root cellar. There's a tunnel, an old mining prospect. Comes out by the creek bed 100 yards north." He was already pulling supplies together with frantic energy. A lantern, the last of the jerky, a water skin. He grabbed a small, heavy oilcloth bundle from his supply chest. "Blasting powder," he explained, seeing May's questioning look. "Enough to make a big noise." The plan formed as he spoke, desperate and final. "You and your aunt go first. When you're clear, I'll set a charge at the front door. The blast will be their diversion. It'll give you time to get to the trees." "And you?" May asked, her voice still tight with betrayal, but now laced with a new urgency. "I'll draw them off," he said simply. "Make them follow me south, away from the creek." It was a suicide mission, and they both knew it. He took the silk pouch from his pocket where he'd retrieved it and pressed it into her hand. "This was always yours," he said. It was the only apology he could offer. Just then Auntie Wynn spoke, her voice surprisingly strong. "There is a man in Crimson Fork, a chandler named Mr. Shea. Tell him Wynn sent you. He will help." She was not just a frail old woman. She was a strategist, a keeper of secrets and escape routes. Finn nodded, his respect for her growing. He worked quickly, setting the charge, cutting a short fuse. He handed May the lantern. "Go. Now." He stood at the trap door, his rifle in his hand, ready to sell his life to buy them a few minutes of freedom. It wasn't redemption, but it was the only atonement he had left to offer. The explosion was a physical blow, a concussive force that tore the front of the cabin apart in a geyser of fire, smoke, and splintered wood. Even from the cold, damp earth of the tunnel, May felt the shock wave through the soles of her boots. She and Auntie Wynn scrambled forward, guided by the wavering, greasy light of the lantern. The air was thin and smelled of wet rock and fungus. Behind them they could hear the shouts of Corbett's men, confused and enraged by the blast. Then, a different sound. The distinct crack of Finn's rifle, farther away now, followed by 2 quick pistol shots. He was doing it. He was drawing them away, pulling the hunters from their trail. They emerged from the tunnel into the frigid night air, gasping. The creek bed was a channel of frozen silence, sheltered by a thick stand of aspens that stood like bone-white sentinels. The northern sky was beginning to glow with the faint promise of dawn. They stumbled through the deep snow, Auntie Wynn leaning heavily on May. They had to keep moving. They looked back only once. The orange glow of the burning cabin was a hateful star against the dark woods, a funeral pyre for the life Finn had built and sacrificed. They traveled for what felt like an eternity, the cold seeping deep into their bones. Just as Auntie Wynn began to falter, a figure appeared from the trees ahead of them. May raised the lantern, her heart seizing with fear, but it was Finn. He was staggering, his face pale and smeared with soot, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. He had a deep, bloody gash on his temple. "They're gone," he rasped, before his legs gave out and he collapsed into the snow. The predatory enforcers were no more. Now the roles were fully reversed. He was the one who was helpless, and she was the one who had to act. She and Auntie Wynn managed to drag him into the shelter of a shallow cave overhang. While Wynn used her knowledge to find and chew a root to pack his head wound, May tended to his arm. The bullet had torn through the muscle. Using the last clean strip of her petticoat, she bound it tightly, her movements focused and sure. As she worked, he regained consciousness, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at her, his gaze clear of everything but pain and a profound, silent question. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She had not forgiven him, but she would not leave him to die. Their survival was now bound together, a hard, cold fact in the unforgiving wilderness. The journey to Crimson Fork was a waking nightmare, a blur of snow, pain, and grim determination. They moved slowly, a wounded, desperate trio, with Finn leaning on May for support. His strength had been spent in the fight, and now he was a liability, a heavy weight she refused to abandon. He was feverish, his quiet grit the only thing keeping him on his feet. They found the chandler, Mr. Shea, a small, wizened man whose calm eyes held no surprise when Auntie Wynn spoke to him in their shared tongue. He ushered them through his shop, fragrant with beeswax and tallow, into a hidden room in the back. For 2 days they existed in that small, safe space while Finn's fever raged and broke. May tended to him, changing his bandages, forcing broth between his lips. In the quiet hours of his delirium, he spoke of his past, of the crushing debt his family owed to Mr. Reed, of the deal that had started as a desperate chance for a new life and had twisted into a pact with the devil. He spoke her name over and over, a litany of regret. When the fever finally passed, he woke to find her sitting by his cot, watching him. The silence was heavy with unspoken words. "He won't stop," Finn said, his voice weak but clear. "Reed, as long as you're alive, you're a threat, a loose end." Auntie Wynn, who had been listening from the corner, finally revealed her most important secret. She produced a small, oilskin-wrapped packet from the folds of her clothing. Inside were documents, ledgers, shipping manifests, and a signed contract. They were written in a mix of English and Chinese characters. "Mr. Reed does not just own a railroad spur," she explained. "He traffics in people. He brings them from China with false promises, works them to death in his mines, and buries them where no one will find them. May was supposed to be a gift for a business partner. When she refused, he decided to silence her. These papers are the proof." It was all there. The polished mastermind, the civilized man of industry, was a slaver and a murderer. Their fight for survival was no longer enough. This was now a fight for justice, for all the nameless ones buried in Reed's mines. Finn pushed himself to sit up, his face set with a new, hard resolve. "Then we don't run," he said. "We finish this." Crimson Fork was Reed's town. His name was on the hotel, the saloon, the land office. He was a king in his small, cold kingdom. They found him in his office at the rail depot, a plush, civilized room with leather chairs and a large oak desk. He was a man in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly parted, his hands soft and clean. He looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to cold, reptilian shock when he saw Finn and May standing there, alive. Auntie Wynn stood just behind them, a silent, formidable presence. "Well," Reed said, recovering quickly, his voice smooth as oiled machinery, "this is an unexpected reunion. I assume you've come to renegotiate your terms, Finn." Finn walked to the desk and placed his good hand flat on the polished wood. He was no longer the desperate man Reed had manipulated. "There are no more terms." Behind him, the door opened, and the town marshal stepped in, followed by a captured and bound Corbett, his face a mask of sullen fury. Reed's composure finally cracked. But as he looked at May, he saw not just her anger, but her strength, the resilience that had saved them all. Vengeance would only honor the world Reed had built. Justice, however imperfect, would build a new one. He nodded to the marshal. "He's all yours." As Reed was led away in irons, his threats and curses echoing in the office, a profound quiet settled. Outside, the morning sun was glinting off the snow, the light clean and sharp. Finn and May stood on the platform, the cold air fresh in their lungs. The future was a blank, untracked wilderness. He looked at her, at the woman he had betrayed, and who had, in turn, saved him. He didn't ask for forgiveness. It was too much to ask. Instead, he simply asked, "Where do we go now?" May didn't answer with words. She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm and warm. It was enough. It was a beginning.